I had a number of flights I was on, and I wanted a good challenge, and I thought, let's write a library in Rust. So this is a port of Sidekiq. Does anyone use Ruby or Sidekiq or Ruby on Rails? Anything?
What is it?
Ruby on Rails.
It's a worker library. That's about it. So I need to kick off some job. I need to call some job.
Oh,
do some jobs.
So it's like rescue jobs?
Yeah, it's like rescue.
Rescue is the name of Ruby on Rails workers, like background job workers.
In fact, I'm pretty sure you guys created rescue. That's right.
It's very possible.
Pretty sure that's the case.
GitHub is a huge driver of Rails right now.
So Sidekiq targets Redis as its store, and yes, if your store gets restarted, then you're pretty much screwed. But the idea is a message bus or a message queue should be pretty quick, and even so, Sidekiq tolerates backlog just fine. You're just bound to
celery.
It's like celery. So if you know celery, there's a bunch of them. I wrote this little example. This is what a worker in Ruby would look like. So if you have some like payment report worker, you can call this from anywhere in your code. This will enqueue it into Redis. So this would be like your client or Ruby on Rails app or whatever. And then later it's you start a Sidekiq process. It sees that there's some class. I guess this would actually say include Sidekiq worker, something like that. So when it's included, it says, hey, register this as available for processing work and built into the library. That's it. So super simple, and Sidekiq is a really, really good, very stable library. We use it at MX, and it does thousands of jobs a second. No problem. I wanted to port this.
The original one or your version is used there?
Sidekiq, the one.
The original Ruby.
The Ruby one, yeah.
Oh,
So we're primarily a Ruby on Rails shop.
Okay.
There are some things I wanted to try though. One, I wanted to port this to Rust. I wanted to make it async because in a lot of cases you end up doing something like call a database or send a push notification, in which case you spend a lot of time just waiting on the wire. And that would be really nice to have an async runtime for that. So this is a particular case where it may be beneficial to have async over just a threaded runtime.
And just to be clear, you're using fixed width Comic Sans in your editor.
Yeah.
I like it.
I think it's called like Comic Mono or something. I don't know. My eyes are not as good, and I'm too proud to go to the eye doctor or something like that.
Oh, you should totally go to that.
Oh, I have that problem too.
No, actually, my glasses got too bad, so I have to go back.
I went to the DMV and had a come to Jesus moment. It was not good.
They're like, we will not pass you. Go to the eye doctor and come get in the back of the 8-hour line.
Baptized by bureaucity. Got it.
Pretty much.
Go directly to eye doctor.
Anyways, the other thing I thought was interesting here is with Ruby, there's no types; it's all dynamically typed. And I thought, man, it'd be really cool if I could say, look, this is the type of data that I'm expecting, and have a library enforce that those things are happening. So this is kind of what I ended up with. You can define some whatever struct you want. I called it payment report worker to basically mimic this Ruby one. And then I say, hey, this worker is going to take some user GUID that I'll use to go do stuff later. And then this is how I implement that worker. And it's just a worker trait that is part of this Sidekiq Rust library, and it takes a type parameter, which is your argument, and then you import that argument, and then you return some result. So this is kind of what it would look like. And then if you wanted to call this in Ruby, you have this perform async. This took a while to get right, but the trait will implement this perform async method for you, and including like a stringified version of this particular worker object, so it'll basically be compatible with Ruby out of the box.
Is that a lambda that returns a templated result type?
Which one?
30? That one?
This is kind of like your very basic return a result, which is basically nothing, or return any error.
Results in email. Are you familiar with Rust schemas?
Oh, no, I'm not.
Are you familiar with Haskell's algebraic data types?
So basically, if people who are
Yes.
paying attention would say this is wrong, I need to return okay with nothing. So that was really fun. The other really powerful feature that a pattern you see a lot in Ruby is the concept of a middleware. So something like an HTTP stack may have a middleware that says, I will inject you as the request is coming in. So I process a request. There's layer of middlewares that are processed. One of those might be check if the request is authorized correctly. If it is, great. Otherwise, say it's unauthorized and halt the request from being processed.
These are like interceptors.
I don't know what the pattern would be called in other things, but
It's common in Node.js and Express.
yeah. So Express, you see it all the
Yeah,
time.
middleware could intercept something and say like, no, you're not authorized. You can't go any further down the
Okay.
stack. We're not actually going to fulfill.
In
this
Java
request."
land, they call it interceptors. In
Oh,
Node, it's
great.
very
Okay.
common to call
Okay.
it.
I'm
Yeah.
not-
Yeah. So it's
But
like
they did the same thing.
one
Middleware interceptors.
you end up making this chain of classes or code that calls one another, and then eventually there's one that actually like processes the request, and then maybe at this end there's one that's turning the bytes and writing it back to the HTTP client or the HTTP socket. Or on the way back, you might say, hey, let the framework, I'll have some framework-specific middlewares or library-specific middlewares that will catch some exception, and then I will turn that into a really nice response. So this typically it's defined this way. I think Sidekiq, I don't actually have internet. I couldn't figure out the thing, so this is what I remember it looking like, how you'd implement this in Sidekiq. It's essentially a few arguments that are called, like the next, job, worker, Redis, and you may want to do some business logic that says, hey, if this is an expired user, then don't allow them to get that push notification to let them in the app, or don't enable that upgraded feature, or don't send the newsletter to them. This is what it might look like. If you're thinking, this looks like, why am I spending so much time on this? It's because if you're thinking about this, how this is implemented, it's let's just initiate a bunch of classes and then, hey, here's a reference to this particular object and just pass it in. But if you think about that in a Rust memory model, it kind of falls on its face because now you have many references everywhere. And so doing a middleware is actually pretty challenging to get right. But this is what it looks like when I implement it in Rust. It's this middleware struct again, and this is what the implementation would look like for that same thing. Reject it if it is expired, and right now it just has this particular user grid for no particular reason. But this is what I ended up with. It's very similar. It has this chain instead of next. It has a job. It has a reference to the worker, and it has that Redis connection pool. I really like this because with Surdy, you can take this kind of basic blob, just this JSON value, and you can actually attempt to decode it into something that you think might be there. And so if you actually think about this Rubyware middleware written in Ruby, I kind of take the job.args, but this could be anything, any hash or whatever, and you can kind of in the Ruby world.
Could crash right there.
Yeah, it could crash right here, or this you can say, hey, check if this is nil. If not, check if it's a hash. If it's a hash, then check if it has an argument. If it's an array, check the first argument. You can get really creative with how you interact with the runtime. You can't really do that in Rust unless you use Surdy with a specific type and say, hey, try to deserialize into this form. And if it works, then give me the value. And if it doesn't, then, hey, I know that this is either a problem or just continue down the chain, right? Because typically middlewares are something that wrap the entire server process, not just one particular worker.
So could you define middleware? We do have a few people online that are less experienced.
So the middleware would be kind of like this. It's something that you would put into your request stack or into your worker stack, where the library will say, hey, I got something, and then you can give that library pieces of code to insert as that job is being processed. So one may say like, hey, here's this job. You can check like this. Hey, is there a user associated with this job that's expired? If so, don't let the job be processed, right? Or let it continue. The user's not expired. Next, go check out a database connection. And if the user needs to connect to a different database, then do that here. And then it can say, go like, exception handling. I don't know. So it's a way of kind of extending the library with user contributed data. Anyone have a better definition?
Would you say it's like a decider
I
or
can,
something? I don't know.
I can
So
give a quick
somebody-
example.
I may have actually misread the question, I think I did, but somebody else said, it's called middleware because it's the operation that happened between,
Yeah.
being in the middle of the initial request and the final response.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. It's really common in like web servers.
Super common in web servers.
Super,
You'll
yeah.
have a framework where you can say like, well, if they're going to this page, run this function. If they're going to that page, run this other function. But if they go to any page, before you go run those functions, run this middleware.
Yeah, and the middleware basically make sure that user has a session and hasn't expired.
Right.
Or maybe
Are they logged in?
Yeah.
Are they authorized?
this is the admin section. Is this user authorized to hit the admin section? They are. Okay, great. Continue. So you can bake some extra logic into that dispatching part. But whoever said that definition, that's very concise and much better than I could think of in a
It
panel
was
state.
Soulbum49.
Thanks, some.
Soul bomb?
Who's that?
Soulbum.
Do we know them?
I don't know.
So I realized-
It's hard to tell with people's usernames.
I realized like knowing Sidekiq and knowing middleware would certainly help this, and I didn't really prepare for that. But I did want to call out, at least in this implementation, SerDes is pretty cool because you can kind of replicate some of that dynamic metaprogramming of, well, what type is this? Let me do something with it. You can get pretty close there, and this is just a re-implementation of if the user is expired, then prevent the job from being processed. Otherwise, call the chain down the line.
So is chain iter and like are some of these types from the Sidekiq Rust library?
Yeah, so this works. This is from my implementation of this, and you can.
So
can-
you wrote a Sidekiq Rust library?
Yes,
Awesome.
it's here. You can go look at it.
Okay, so this is your project.
Yeah,
Cool.
You wrote it on some flights.
yeah.
You can write code without internet. How do you do that?
It's a fun challenge.
Yeah, wait, seriously?
My last challenge is like in Rust. How do I change the process name?
Ooh.
And I'm like grepping through system library on here, and it's like I know how to do this in Linux, but I don't know how to do
Well,
this.
it's platform specific, so
Yep.
they haven't exposed a generic.
There's actually a good crate for it,
Is that
but
There's some.
Can you download
new-
all the documentation?
There's some
Yeah.
new Electron app
fact,
thing that has
all there.
documentation for all the programming
default.
languages. Does anybody remember what that one's called?
Oh, I remember
DevDocs, or is it
I
a
remember
different
that.
one? DevDoc or DevDocs?
That might be it. But
You can
it's
actually
an
do,
Electron app, and it has playgrounds, and it has documentation for a bunch of different popular languages.
you could
Oh,
do
this sounds better than DevDocs.
you could do cargo doc dash all,
Yeah.
and it will do everything. And so you can actually just do open up your docs and Shift S to search through it, and you can change your crate to everything. And then
I
the Rust
don't
up
think
has
you-
the standard library.
Yeah, I think the dash all is meant to be. That's actually a different.
Oh, yeah, I
it's
guess
for
you
the
don't need
workspace, right? But you'll get all of the packages you consume if you just have the one crate in your workspace.
Totally.
You just cargo doc and it'll get you all there.
Yep. But anyways, to make this work, I had to use more arcs than I cared to, and everything is it's just immutable references. You can't do mutable references in here, which is how you get around the preventing things from doing expensive copies. But you have to do some also creative things like, well, how do you implement this chain? And it's anyway, you can go read the code if you care about that. It was really interesting. It took me a while to get it written, but it works. So here's that disconnected for whatever reason, but
Okay, we now have an official async expert that we can ask all our async questions to.
But anyways, the library's on GitHub. Sidekiq Rust. There's like Sidekiq and Sidekiq RS were taken on Cargo.
Seriously?
Or on, yeah. So I ended up calling mine rusty-sidekiq, which I thought was clever.
Like it.
Trusty side.